A special thanks to J Hurl24 over on No Sleep for letting us use his story. You should check the description for the links to his work. I just bought my first house. This place was in a nice part of town and was cheap. My real estate agent, Aaron, told me it had been on the market for almost 2 years. Standing outside the house, Aaron read the listing to me. It was built in 1889, 10,000 square feet, 2 stories, attic, 4 bedrooms, 3 full bathrooms, 2 half bathrooms, a kitchen, dining room, family room, living room, servant quarters. What was that? I asked. Sorry to interrupt. That just caught me off guard. No worries, Aaron said. The house was built in 1889. That was a common feature in these kinds of homes. Oh, I said, slightly embarrassed. Why don't we just go inside? Aaron put his clipboard at his side and motioned me forward. After you. We walked up the walkway to the front door. I looked around at the yard and noticed 2 things. The front yard was massive and it was well manicured. That's a lot of land to take care of. I wonder how long it takes the owner to mow it, I said. Fumbling for the keys, Aaron let out a chuckle. The owners don't. Stopping on the front step, I looked back at Aaron. What do you mean? The sound of the door's lock clicked open with a loud thunk as Aaron turned the key. Jake, this house sits on 18 acres. The owners are in their 80s and rich. They hire someone to come take care of it, he explained. I didn't know that. Makes sense, though, I said. When I walked through the doorway, I was greeted by this grand entryway. There was this ornate staircase that was obviously built as a status symbol. Wow, I sighed, taking it all in. Aaron stepped behind me. The pictures definitely did not do this justice. He took a step in front of me, looking at the floor plan. Looks like the dining room is just past the staircase, and the family room is to the right. Where do you want to start? Let's start from the top down, I said. We made our way upstairs and looked around. Everything seemed normal until we got downstairs to the kitchen. The kitchen itself was massive. There was a huge prep area and a walk-in pantry that was easily 200 square feet. Tucked in a corner next to the hallway that led to the servants' quarters was a door. I don't see this in the floor plan, Aaron said. When he tried to open the door, it was locked. Must be where they stored their valuables while the house is being shown, I said. It's fine, let's just move on. Aaron shrugged and led me down the hall to the servants' quarters. We got into this concrete room that was smaller than the pantry. I looked at the walls and could see holes in the wall where beds were mounted. I can see why they didn't include pictures of this room, Aaron said. Feels like a jail cell. He was right. What made that sentiment feel even more ominous was the door to the room. It was this heavy metal door with a rectangular slat that covered a hole 3/4 of the way up the door. You're sure this is the servants' quarters and not some kind of jail? I asked. Aaron looked through the stack of papers and pulled out a page. This is the history of the house. He read the page, then looked back up to me. There's no history of a jail. The original owner was a pastor. My notes from the selling agent say that everything in this room is original, minus the 4 bunks that were mounted to the door. Apparently, the current owners keep the door shut, and the wife refuses to even come near the hallway. I can't explain why, but the mention of the original owner being a pastor made my skin crawl. "I think I've seen enough," I said. "Same here," Aaron said, a hint of disappointment in his voice. "You want to look at some other houses?" "No, I want this one," I said, "but lowball them." Aaron perked up. "Given what we've seen, I wouldn't let you offer the asking price." "It's low, but not low enough," he laughed. We made our way out of the house, and Aaron called the selling agent. To our surprise, they accepted the offer without any argument. When he hung up the phone, I looked back at the house. What did they say? "The house is yours," Aaron said. "I even talked them into paying all closing and inspection costs." A smile took over my face. That's awesome. After a month of signing forms and getting the inspection done, I met Aaron at his office. "Here you go." He tossed me the keys. "If you have any questions as you get settled, let me know. Don't forget to tell your friends and family. If they are in the market, give me a call," he said with a slight smirk on his face. The next day, I packed all my worldly possessions into my car and drove to the house. When I pulled into the driveway and got out of the car, I looked up at the window on the second story. My stomach dropped when I saw a face in the curtain. I immediately pulled out my phone and called Aaron. The second I heard him answer the call, I started talking. "Aaron, are the owners still living here?" "No, they moved 3 states away months ago. Why?" he asked. "Is there anyone else that could have the keys?" I asked, panic flooding my voice. "I asked the owners and their agent when we met to sign the last of the paperwork. They said nobody else has keys, no family, friends, or contracted workers," Aaron explained. "What's going on, Jake?" Taking a deep breath in, I calmed down a little. I just pulled in and saw someone looking at me through the upstairs window. There was silence on the other line for a moment. "Jake, you need to call the police. It isn't uncommon for squatters to find a way into houses for sale. If you think someone is in there, don't go in." Aaron's voice was serious and direct. "Oh," I stammered. "Okay, I'll call them." I hung up the phone and dialed 911. I told them what I saw, and they dispatched an officer to me. An older cruiser pulled in, and an older officer got out. "You Jake?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. He walked up and shook my hand. "I'm Officer Clark. So, tell me what you saw." After I was done telling him about the window, he radioed something back to dispatch. "Do I have permission to enter the house?" he asked. "Of course," I said. "I just bought the place and haven't even gone inside yet." "Congrats," he said, a genuine smile on his face. He patted me on the shoulder and I handed him the keys. "Stay here and I'll be back in a minute." I nodded and watched as he made his way up the walkway and inside. I could hear his updates from the radio in his car. He made his way upstairs and through each room. I heard him report there was nothing found. Once he made his way down to the kitchen, I remembered the mysterious door. Wonder if the keys opened that door. I mumbled to myself. I heard the radio key up again. Radio 1243. Bottom floor clear. No sign of entry. No sign of intruder. There's a door in the kitchen, but the keys the owner gave me don't work. Based on the dust and cobwebs collected, there's no sign this door has been touched in years. Exiting the residence, you can show me clear. Officer Clark walked through the front door moments later. He handed me my keys and looked down at his body cam. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, all clear," he said, not looking up. "Officer Clark, 1243, call end, turning body cam off." He clicked a button on the front and it beeped. "Thank you, sir," I said. "Sorry for the trouble, didn't want to risk it." Officer Clark looked up at me and smiled. "That's what I'm here for. Let us take the risk for you," he said. He turned his car off and closed the door. He turned back towards me and his face was serious. "Jake, I'm going to be up front. I have responded to this house many times over the years." I was so nervous. My body started to tremble. What do you mean?" I asked. "The older couple that used to live here, they inherited this house from the wife's father. He inherited it from his father," Officer Clark explained. "When they had children, they refused to live here. That's why all the furniture inside is old." "Wait, what do you mean the furniture inside?" I asked. "I thought they moved everything out." Officer Clark chuckled. "Son, they haven't been inside that house in at least 30 years. I look back at the house. They've been trying to sell it for about as long. Every few years they take the listing down, lower the price, and wait a few months before posting it again. When I walked through with my agent, everything inside looked like someone had been cleaning there every day," I said. "It felt lived in, clean but lived in." I looked back at Officer Clark. He was eyeing me with curiosity. "Let me guess," he said. "This is your first house, and I'm going to bet that you didn't look at any others." "How'd you know?" I laughed. "Because if you'd been through this before, you'd know that real estate agents either clean and stage a house or pay someone to do so before showing it to potential buyers," he said. "Anyways, the couple you bought it from, I was in high school when they moved out. My parents were friends of theirs, so I talked to them before they left." He motioned me to walk with him. "So what did they say?" I asked. "Well, Hank, the husband, told me that they refused to be in that hell hole, as he put it. They didn't even take their clothes with them. They packed up the few valuables and heirlooms they had and left town," he said. "They didn't say anything else about it. I was taught by my dad from a young age. If someone is going to tell you something, they'll tell you. So I didn't ask any further." He stopped and lit a cigarette and offered me one. "No, thank you, though," I said. Well, after they left, I asked my dad if he knew what he meant by hellhole. He paused to take a drag. My dad told me I was too young and I wouldn't understand, then whooped me for prying into someone else's business. "That's a little harsh," I said. "Ah, it was a different time," he chuckled. Anyways, it wasn't the worst whooping he gave me. Did he ever tell you? I asked. Officer Clark looked at me. His eyes had a slight hint of fear. Yeah, he did. He took another drag and put out his cigarette. When I graduated from the academy, we went back to my parents' house to celebrate. As everyone else started going to bed, my dad grabbed a bottle of scotch and 2 glasses. He brought me onto the front porch and poured us each a glass. His eyes watered when he began the story. Must have been a big moment, I said. Heh, yeah, it was, he said. Anyways, he handed me the glass and looked off in the distance. First he told me he was proud. Then he told me it was time for me to know why that couple left town. Only when he said it, he said, "Well, I guess I better tell you. Now that you got a badge, you'll need to know why that house should have burned down long ago." He looked out at the grass field that was now my front lawn. "You okay?" I asked. Looking back at me, he wiped away a tear. "Oh, don't worry about me." He chuckled. So I took a sip from the glass he handed me. "Son, there's a lot of horrible things one man can do to another." He told me. "I learned that lesson in the jungles of Vietnam when I was your age. But there's nothing, and I mean nothing, man can do to another that compares to the evil that lives in that house." He put his hand on my shoulder and polished off his cup before pouring himself some more. That poor family lived in fear of that house for 3 generations. Jake and Charlene were the husband and wife you bought the house from. "Oh, okay," I said. The unfortunate coincidence of me sharing his name wasn't lost on either of us. Officer Clark nodded solemnly before continuing. Jake was the son of John and Mary. John was the son of Hank Jr. and Diane. Hank Jr. was the son of Hank and Joanne. Joanne was the daughter of the original owners, Reverend John and his wife Catherine. He took another drag before putting out his cigarette. "Anyways, Jake told me and your mother that he always felt like he was being watched whenever they were at that house. Didn't matter if they were inside or on the property, they always felt watched. I used to stay the night there from time to time when me and Jake were young. Now you know I don't subscribe to nonsense, but I can confirm there was something dark at that place. When my dad told me that, I won't lie, it scared me. This is the same man that refused to let me or my brothers believe in any of the mythical beings like Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and well, you know what I mean. I swore I could see a slight smile on his face. Why? I laughed. He didn't want his boys growing up believing in some bullshit that doesn't exist. He put his hands up in a mocking gesture. Hey, his words, not mine. He chuckled for a moment before the happiness brought on by nostalgia vanished. Have you walked to the backside of the property yet? I shook my head no. I need to show you something. We began walking in the grass. Whoa, I said. When we got about 10 feet away from the driveway, this almost overwhelming feeling of sorrow came over me. Is it always like this? Officer Clark was a few steps ahead. He looked over his shoulder at me. Like what? Nothing. I think I'm just a little spooked, I answered. So, back to what my dad told me. That family lived in horror for 3 generations. Each one experienced something worse than the last. It started with Jake's grandfather, Hank Jr. He and his brother Jake answered the call back in 1917 and joined the Marine Corps when we entered World War I. In 1918, when the war ended, only Hank Jr. came home. A year later, he married Diane. In late 1919, they had their first son, and Hank Jr. named him after the brother that never came home, Jake. I asked him the same question I bet you're asking me. We stopped, and he looked at me waiting for me to ask. Why do I need to know their family history? I asked. Exactly what I thought then, he said with a grin, and I'm going to give you the same answer he gave me. 1918 is when it all started. What does that mean? I asked. He motioned me forward and we started walking again. I couldn't help but listen and hang on every word. That's the same response I had. After Hank Jr. and Diane got married, they moved in with Hank Sr. and Joanne. Everything was fine until late 1919. My father began to sound more nervous at this point. He finished his second glass before I had even gotten through half of mine. Dad was hitting the bottle hard that night. He really only drank on special occasions, so this was a new sight for me. Officer Clark's voice had a slight shake to it. We got to what looked like this beautiful garden with an ivy arch. When we walked through the arch, I realized it wasn't a garden. As I looked around, I saw a row of headstones on the left side of this massive grass rectangle. On the outer perimeter of the grass, there was a cobblestone path that looped around and back to where we stood. It was lined with a beautiful mix of white carnations, blue hydrangeas, yellow tulips, and white and red roses. Wow, I sighed. Officer Clark sat on a bench just in front of us. He motioned for me to sit down. He poured another glass. When he looked at mine and said, "Drink up, son. You're going to need it." I downed the rest of it. He poured me a glass and looked back at me. So, in 1918, they were all living in that house. Things were going as well as they could. That was until Jake's body finally made it home. When the house was first built, they had this family cemetery built. You see that first headstone on the far left? Yeah, I said. That's where Jake is buried. He was the first of the family to be laid to rest. He said, pointing at the headstone, "Go read it." I stood up and made my way down the path to it. The headstone read, "Here lies Jake, redacted, Corporal 5th Regiment, U.S. Marines, died, June 1918, World War I." To the left of his name was the Naval Cross. To the right was the Purple Heart. I made my way back to Officer Clark. "Looks like he was a hero," I said. "He died to save his squad from a grenade when they went over the top." He lit another cigarette and again offered me one. Giving in, I reached out and took one. "Thanks." "Smoke up, son. You're going to need it," he said, and we both laughed. I couldn't help but ask, "So what else did he say?" The words came out involuntarily. "He told me that Reverend John did the funeral. After that," he said, "Reverend John ended the funeral with the brother, son, grandson, and friend to many finally came home. Jake, I prayed for you every day you were gone. I'm so very sorry my prayers weren't loud enough. Curse you, God. Why did you refuse to listen to my prayers after all I have sacrificed for you?" Rumor has it, he spat on his Bible and threw it into a fire. He said, "Holy shit," I said. "That's not how I expected that to go." No one did. That's the day a town lost their pastor, and a man that was revered and loved turned to a bitter old drunk. He looked at the treetops in the distance. The sun was setting behind them, and the sky turned a beautiful auburn red. That night, everything changed. Like the flip of a switch, Reverend John was a completely different person after that. Once all friends and extended family left, Joanne was the last one awake. She woke up Hank Sr. screaming, "I hear him, Hank. I hear our son. He's calling out for me." Hank Sr. woke up and started to console her, thinking she was just grieving. That was until he heard a voice from outside a window. It was screaming in pain, "Mama, I want to see my mom. I don't want to die." "Jake?" I asked. He nodded and took a drag from his cigarette. "Uh-huh." He returned home. The men all ran outside while Diane had to restrain Joanne, who was screaming to let her see her son. They all returned after a while, having not found anything but a freshly covered gravesite. We all heard it, Hank Sr. said. Everyone in the house just looked at Joanne and Hank Sr. before collectively shaking their heads. After that, they all went to bed, passing it off as parents grieving the loss of their son. I snapped my head towards the headstones. "What?" I looked closely at Jake's headstone. I thought someone had said something, and for a second, I thought I saw eyes looking back at me. "Sorry," I said, turning back towards Clark. "Thought I heard something." "That happens out here." He looked down at his watch. About a year went by with nothing else happening, and on the anniversary of Jake's death, Reverend John fell ill. That night, Hank Jr. was tending to his grandfather. Hank Jr. heard the bells on the grandfather clock chime 9 times. On the 9th toll of the bell, there was the same screaming voice that made his mother cry 1 year ago. This time screaming, "You watched me die and did nothing." Hank Jr. fell onto the ground. The Reverend sat up and looked outside. "Jake, is that really you?" "Junior, what does he mean?" Hank Jr. never told his family about what happened on the 23rd of June. "What happened?" I asked, still holding an unlit cigarette in my hand. Hank Jr. broke down crying. "I'm sorry, Jake. I'm so sorry. How was I supposed to know?" He cried as the ghost of his brother came through the open window. "You gave the fucking order and didn't even have the balls to follow us. You fucking coward." Hank Jr. was shaking from a mix of grief, shame, and fear. He stood up and faced the brother he watched die and yelled, "I can't change the past." His brother's ghost took a step towards him. Hank Jr. turned and ran out of the room. The Reverend turned to face Jake. "What do you want?" Saying nothing, Jake placed his hand on his grandfather's shoulder and pulled the spirit from his body. When Hank Jr. returned with everyone else, all they saw was Reverend John's lifeless body slumped over on the edge of the bed. Clark said, motioning to the row of headstones. I stood up and walked over to them. "Who's next?" I whispered to myself. I turned my head and looked at Clark. When I saw him sitting on the bench, something deep inside told me to not look away. I only stopped when I saw the corner of the path in my peripherals. I turned and looked at the headstones in front of me. Reverend John, 1919, I read aloud. I moved to the next one, Catherine, 1920. I turned and looked at Officer Clark. He was still sitting on the bench and gave me a wave. I looked back at the headstones and stepped to the next one, Hank Sr. and Joanne, 1953. As soon as I read the date, I felt a slight breeze of freezing cold air blow past me. They died in a car accident. Officer Clark's voice was right behind me. That's I froze. The realization of what just happened hit me. He was at least 100 feet away from me. Even if he was sprinting, it wouldn't have been that quick. And he was sitting down smoking. "Keep going," he said. I stepped to the next one, Jake, 1944, World War II. His brother watched him die, just like Uncle. His voice was now solemn. Hank Jr., 1967. My heart started pounding harder and harder as I read. The coward outlived his brother and his oldest son. Diane, 1980. She never forgave him. A slight shake to his voice. John, 2010. I read, shaking at this point. Everything in me wanted to turn around, but I physically couldn't. Like father, like son, His voice was closer now. Mary 2015. I could feel him grab me by the arms. His hands were freezing cold. Have you noticed the similarities yet? He asked. He sounded like his head was over my shoulder. Sons of the family named Jake died in war. His grip tightened. No, think about the dates everyone died. I pieced it together. Everyone died on the 23rd of June. My stomach dropped. And now, the last one, he moved me to the last headstone. Clark, 2016. I choked out. Keep reading. His voice was filled with pain. Shot in the line of duty. He let go of me, and I turned around. Is this some kind of joke? Smoke up, son. You can use my lighter, he said. He handed me his lighter, and I put it up to the cigarette. Thanks, I said. As I desperately tried to spark the lighter, it wouldn't light. What the hell? I pulled my hand away only to watch as the lighter disappeared from my hand. Clark was standing there watching everything. Sadness filled his eyes. Everyone died at the same time and on the same day. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pocket watch. You'll need this, he said, as he put it in my still open hand. I looked down at the watch. It was old and worn. Thanks, but I said as I looked up only to see he was gone. I ran back to the front of the house only to see a different police car pulling up. This one was new. The officer stepped out of the car and walked up to me. The sun had almost completely set, and I could only see his silhouette. "Can I help you, officer?" I asked. "Did you call for a possible intruder?" he asked. "Yeah, that was me, but..." I stopped mid-sentence when the man in front of me stepped more into view. The uniform he wore was similar to Clark's, only it seemed newer. "I'm Jake." "Sorry it took so long, he started to say. "Sorry to interrupt you. Everything's fine here," I said. I walked around the perimeter of the house after I called and realized that I left a window open. Sorry for the confusion. I scratched the back of my neck, trying my best to swallow my fear. I didn't want to lie to them, but I also didn't want to risk anyone else falling victim to this land. "All good," he said. "Are you sure you don't want me to sweep the house?" I got the feeling that he had heard the stories of this place. His voice had a tone of relief when he spoke. "Yeah," I laughed. "I'm all good here. I just want to get moved in." His face went from relieved to shocked at what I said. "Oh, okay." He backed up to his car, got in, and backed out of the drive. A second later, I heard his car speeding away. I can't blame him. I wanted to do the same. I turned around and begrudgingly made my way into the house. The feeling of being watched increased with each step forward. I swung the door open and stepped inside. "What the fuck?" I yelled as I heard the door slam shut behind me. I stood frozen in place when I heard a sinister female voice come from the kitchen. "Oh, come on, Jake. Don't be afraid." "Who are you?" I asked. "Follow my voice and find out," it called. "Jake," another voice, this time it sounded like an older man, came from upstairs. "I know you're dying to find out what's behind that door," the woman's voice said mockingly. I heard the muffled sounds of a grandfather clock signaling the top of the hour. Ding, a younger man's voice mocked the clock. Dong, the woman's voice joined in. Ding, I could tell there were more voices, but couldn't separate them in my head. They all spoke as one. All I knew was the voices were coming from all around me. Dong, they continued. Ding. I shook as I realized what was happening. 5, I muttered and began to count. Dong, they mocked. Ding. 7, I said, closing my eyes. Dong. A familiar voice spoke this time. I opened my eyes to see Clark standing in front of me, but he wasn't the helpful veteran cop I sat with earlier. "Clark?" I asked. His face was filled with rage, and he held a newspaper. "Stop fucking around. Let's go." "What do you want from me?" I asked. "What do any of you want from me?" Clark had grabbed me by the arm and was dragging me to the mysterious door in the kitchen. As we walked, I saw the ghost of a man I unexplainably knew was Reverend John. "In due time, son." The mystery door swung open. A dim yellow light shone on the wall inside the door. "Please," I pleaded. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, the ghost of Clark was gone. I heard the ticking of the clock from inside the open doorway. Cautiously, I made my way down the stairs into the basement. I stood at the bottom of the staircase and looked around. All that was in the room was the broken remains of what used to be a grandfather clock and an empty desk in the corner. "You left him for dead." A voice I had long forgotten echoed in my head. Just then I heard Clark at the door. "Time to pay for your sins, just like the brothers in our family had 2 years ago." The sound of a newspaper hitting the concrete floor echoed around me. "Why? I didn't do shit to you or your family," I yelled, feeling the tears run down my cheeks. "Read it." The tone he used wasn't yelling, but commanding. I reached down and picked up the newspaper. June 2016, redacted police officer shot by a strange brother in botched escape attempt. My heart sank after reading the title. The picture below it was a black and white photo of Clark in his dress blues. His department seal and the American flag served as the background. The picture next to his was one of the man I bought this cursed house from, Jake. "I'm not him. Please just let me leave," I bawled. "We know. You are much worse." I heard every voice speaking collectively. Then, the voice that was in my head spoke again. "You left him for dead." This time it was real, and its scream made the ground shake, sending a crack in the concrete from where I stood all the way up the wall. Clark threw another newspaper down. "No, it's not possible," I said. I picked up the paper, and the headline was read to me: "Man crashes car into parents' house." I dropped to my knees. "Mom," I cried, "I didn't mean—" "You went to the fucking bar, got hammered, and drove your goddamn fucking truck into our bedroom," she screamed. The walls shook, and I could feel debris from the ceiling landing on my shoulder. "You thought you killed your father, but you killed me instantly. He still lives while I'm buried in a fucking hole." I picked up the paper. June 2023. I found the article my mother read from. "You died at the same time as this family." My mother's face morphed into something evil and unrecognizable. "And now you will pay for what you have done." As she reached her hand towards me, thinking back to Clark's story about how the Reverend died, I knew what was coming. Even worse, I knew there was no avoiding it. "Not yet," Clark said, grabbing my mother's arm. Part of me wanted to defend her, but I was more grateful that Clark spared me. "Soon," he said, pointing to the clock. I heard this soft ticking noise coming from my pocket. I pulled out the pocket watch and clicked it open. "No," I whispered. The clock read 8:15 p.m. I knew I had 45 minutes. Clark led my mother upstairs, shutting the door behind them. I pulled out my phone in a desperate attempt to call for help, only to find there was no signal. I'm writing this in my notes in case anyone finds my body. If you are reading this, run. Run as far and as fast as you can. This house is a trap. Don't believe the friendly people you meet outside. They aren't real. They will lure you in here and they will take your spirit. I can hear them outside the door, and the grandfather clock is sounding its 9th chime. I wonder if it's painless